Welcome to M.E.S.H. My name is Pamela Brewer, and I'm going to be here with you every week to talk about your mental, emotional, and social health because that's all in play every single day, all day long. We don't think about it, but it's true. Let me remind you one more thing. The best possible way to get yourself into relationship trouble is to assume someone else can read your mind and that you can read theirs. It's the swiftest way possible to get yourself into an exhausting communications merry-go-round without anybody having a good time. What should you do instead? Ask questions. My name is Pamela Brewer, and I'll be back in just a second, and I'll be asking questions. Well, I would like to introduce you folks to today's guest, Olivia Chadwick. Olivia is co-author, and I'm going to ask her to talk a little bit about her co-author. But Olivia, you have written a book entitled 17 Runs. Let's start with the name of your book, your co-author, and how did this book come to be?
Thanks for the question. So nice to meet you, Dr. Brewer. Thanks for having me on the show. 17 Runs is the name of the book. We laugh because we go running in the book, and the book is called 17 Runs, but the truth is the book is a personal growth and development book, or self-help section. I'm totally fine with that way of referring to personal development as well. Really, that it's a metaphor. Yes, we go on runs, but it's the metaphor of doing challenges in life, of setting goals and going after those goals and being typically faced with our internal demons when we pursue those goals, as well as external barriers and roadblocks and failures and challenges that we face. We did that literally on the run, as well as we talk in the book about what some of those roadblocks and barriers that we faced were. The reason it's called 17 Runs is because Garnett approached me to write a book, and Garnett has been my athlete that I've coached. He's been my friend. Over time, he became my mentor, and further than that, we consider each other chosen family. I won't get into that right now, but Garnett has been a part of my life for a really long time. And anyone who knows Garnett knows that he has a wealth of life experience that has allowed him to overcome challenges and become very successful in life.
Well, let me interrupt you for 1 second, because many people know Garnett, but I don't think our listeners do. So let's have Garnett's full name.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Great. Okay. So his name is Garnett Morris.
Okay.
Garnett is a very successful entrepreneur. He's in his 70s. I met him 13 years ago. So we're about 30 years apart in age.
Okay.
Do you have any more questions than that?
Well, I do have a question because, I'm all about asking questions. Mm-hmm. You have a degree in kinesiology.
That's correct. You have my master's in.
I'm going to ask you, what on earth is that? A lot of people are like, what? What does that mean? So what does that mean? What do you do? And how could it be helpful to somebody?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. It's a good point of reference. Really, the whole school or department of kinesiology formed literally the year that I started my degree in that area, undergraduate originally, in the early 2000s. And prior to that, it would have been called the College of Education, Physical Education in most academic departments.
Okay.
Because the primary pathway would have been teaching phys ed in schools. Gotcha. But what was happening was the field of science in the area of exercise, so the field of exercise science essentially, was growing to the extent that it expanded beyond just the education of physical literacy. It was moving into sport performance. It was moving into entrepreneurship because the fitness industry was exploding. It was moving into utilizing it as the way that I utilize it now as a treatment therapy, right? A clinical treatment therapy for rehabilitation, for mental health, for the chronic disease management, and all the way up to, that's like a continuum all the way up to performance.
So why would someone come to see you? Who is the person? Who's your ideal client? How do they know that you're the person they should seek out for helping?
Oh, yeah. So my ideal client, I consider myself as somebody who works in the allied health professionals, which is not necessarily how a client might perceive me in the world. Like most people would think personal trainer, I operate within the fitness industry. And so I really toggle the two, to be honest with you, because I am running a business that the world perceives as the fitness industry, and they have those expectations.
Okay.
But my training and background is how do we use exercise as a therapeutic modality? So the person that would come to see me, maybe they've gone into their doctor's office and their doctor said, your blood pressure's up, you're dealing with a lot of stress. I'm starting to notice maybe pre-diabetes, and they're thinking it's a time to have the conversation about pharmacology. But the person in the doctor's office is saying, well, like, I'm still 40 years old. I know my life isn't going the direction that I want it to. I still feel like there's an opportunity for me to do something about this. Can I pause on the pharmacology or do that in tandem with making some changes in my lifestyle that up to this point I haven't been able to make, but they want to? That person would reach out to me. Typically at first, I think they're thinking, well, I'm sedentary. I'm not exercising. So if I just start doing that, then I can start to turn my health around in some way. And absolutely, there's great clinical evidence to show that there's opportunity for healing and recovery and flourishing ultimately at the end of the day in terms of how you live your life is possible. But I think that what we haven't done societally a really great job of is helping that person realize, look, it's not because you haven't had the discipline or the willpower or something that the characteristics of you have not allowed you to pursue lifestyle in a way that is best for your well-being. There are lots of systemic factors and social factors that haven't allowed you to pursue exercise. And really a great coach helps to tease out, what is the level of stress and what are things going on? And that can be related to, your belief systems, childhood trauma. It could be related to some relationships that are happening in your life that are requiring so much cognitive load or emotional load that you don't have the capacity. Nobody would. It's not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's not lack of discipline. Nobody would have the capacity to now have the energy to pursue exercise and the logistics surrounding that in the circumstances that you're currently in. So, I really, hopefully, in my role, like, yes, I'm applying great exercise science. Like, that's been something that's been part of my practice since the very beginning. But how my practice has grown is using a coaching approach to really help people make meaningful changes in their lives. So
let me ask you this. As you describe what you're doing, I mean, it sounds like such a perfect fit for really what M.E.S.H is all about. Because, as you know, I mean, I look at the mental, emotional, and social health because it all ties together. I noticed in 17 runs, though, when you first introduced us to your co-author, you were thinking maybe this guy was uncoachable. How did somebody show up as uncoachable? What was he like?
Garnett is, like I said, he's an entrepreneur and creative successful. So he wasn't unnecessarily uncoachable because he wasn't willing and didn't show up when he was able to show up. Like the logistics of his life were really challenging. So running his company, it was an international company, and we live in the middle of Canada, which has like the worst flights on the planet. So sometimes if you wanted to work a full day and get off at 6:00, the only flight available to you to fly back into where we would live would be at 9:00 at night, which means you were getting in 11 or 12 if the flight was on time, which, let's face it, we have 8 months of winter. So that was pretty rare. So uncoachable in the sense that, like, he was committed to his professional pursuits. And sometimes then, our health or our family relationships really can be on a back burner, or our personal well-being can be in a back burner to that one pursuit that you're on. And so one of the roles that I had with Garnett was really try to help him make the goal that we had of running the Kananaskis 100-mile relay realistic and achievable, given the context of his life.
Let me ask you this. You make a lot of good points in 17 runs about how to identify and sort of deal with stress and then navigate it. And one of the comments that you made was a suggestion that we learn how to get comfortable with discomfort, which sounds like a non sequitur if ever I heard one. So What is the value? I mean, what are you talking about? Why do I want to get comfortable with discomfort?
Yeah. Um, well, anytime we're going to go through a growth experience, we're going to be confronted with either external, internal barriers that are going to make us feel physically uncomfortable. And that can be because of thoughts that we're having about ourselves or the experience that are causing typically emotions in our body. Those thoughts lead to emotions in our body. And our ability to deal with discomfort is our ability to regulate emotion. That's one of the cool metaphors that I love in the book, and why, from a clinical perspective, exercise in and of itself can build stress resilience, is
Ah,
because to run is a physically uncomfortable experience. To get your heart rate up and know that you're not having a panic attack is a skill that people have to learn, especially if they deal with anxiety, which many people do.
huge.
Um, huge,
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
And so a great metaphor, when we exercise, we're getting physically uncomfortable in our body, and we have to learn the signs and signals of our body as, are they truly a threat, or are they a perceived threat, or are they something that we'll experience for a short period of time, but they're not telling us information that we need to excessively pay attention to, or that we can actually tolerate for short periods of time and then move beyond that experience. That is the physical discomfort. And it's funny because, as much as I know that the exercise itself can build stress resilience, a lot of our conversation that I had with Garnett took that to other levels, because he was, pursuing these big professional goals, and he would
Sure.
almost daily out on the run, where he would be having something that he was having to go to, and he wouldn't tell me what the thing was that he
Mhm.
was going to go do, the sales pitch or whatever it was. He would say, I've got something today and I feel nauseous. I feel physically sick to my stomach. And I would hear him and go, oh yeah, like we all know what being physically sick to your stomach feels like. And it was just this very cognitive thing. But then later on, when he was, encouraging me and challenging me to pursue things for myself professionally, I would have that thing in the day, and I would wake up in the morning, drop my kid off to school, but the whole time I could feel this growing sense of nausea in my stomach. And
Mhm.
you'd realize, like, okay, this is what Garnet was talking about. This is okay. This is exactly what he experiences. I'm experiencing exactly what I should be experiencing when I'm in this growth opportunity. But I never knew it was going to feel so terribly awful. But, it was a lot of just cognitive reframing of saying, this is exactly what it should feel like. And it will pass after this experience that I have to go through passes. And the weird thing probably won't go away, because Garnett's at a pretty high level and he still tells me that's how he feels.
But again, it's I'm so pleased to hear you talk about it in this way, because again, it underscores the critical importance and the value of noticing how you feel throughout your body,
Mm.
mentally, emotionally, physically, what is going on that might be have some emotional underpinnings. And we certainly know that trauma shows up in our physical bodies in so many different ways. Again, you make a lot of really interesting points in 17 runs. One of the things that I really sort of keyed in on is your language about idiosyncrasies, because so many of us think that, well, I've got these idiosyncrasies and I'm kind of embarrassed and I really have a lot of shame around it, and I kind of like don't want to deal with it. I don't want anybody to notice. Oh my gosh, everybody's noticed. But you have a different take on how to think about idiosyncrasies. Talk about that for a second.
When Garnet and I, like, honestly almost first met, I think it was like the first the conversation, or the second one, he told me that he had ADHD. And so I met Garnet.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second, just to let folks know that ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that shows up in children and adults. So I just want to let folks know what that means.
Thank you for that
Yeah.
clarification. I appreciate that. And actually, this was back in 2011. So there wasn't the widespread talk about ADHD that there is now.
Mhm.
And in truth, the reason why it came up so early in our conversation is Garnet had actually been recently diagnosed, as
Ah,
an adult. And so it contextualized a lot of his life experiences, a lot of things that he thought about himself, he was just different, or an outsider, or a black sheep, or didn't belong in lots of ways. The ADHD diagnosis allowed him to realize that it was just how his brain worked. It wasn't
Yes.
that he wasn't perceiving the world in the right way. It was just in a different way, or a neurodivergent way, which fortunately, when he had found out, he had already learned to work with his ADHD to actually utilize it as a strength, because he has a ton of mental energy. At 70 years old, he can still engage in conversations all day long and have a lot of ideation and imagination and inspiration that happens to him. So he'd already started to realize that this was something that actually allowed him to up level in many ways,
Yes.
but also comes with its challenges that, probably he had that relationship with it that many people with ADHD do, that there's flaws that come along with it, perceived flaws, especially societal flaws, in terms of how you relate to other people and the world.
Right.
Um, for him, he had already been able to realize that he was able to tap into the strength of it, and it had allowed him to become very successful. So that reframe happened very, very early in our relationship. That idea, that thing about him that was really, really different, was what made him so great.
You're bringing up so many really important points, because so many of us have a diagnosis of some sort, and then we start to think that we are the diagnosis. And what you have just said so very clearly is, you can have a diagnosis and it doesn't mean that you can't do anything. It doesn't mean that you're flawed. It may mean that you experience the world in a different way, but quite frankly, difference is kind of a good thing. We're not all mirror images of ourselves. So again, forgive me for interrupting you, but I really wanted to highlight that we are not our diagnosis, and a diagnosis doesn't have to stop you from living your life. And clearly he's doing a bang up job.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the flip side is that those things that are difficult about it too don't go away. And so building those inner resources to help you know where it feels painful to, to live in a world where you perceive it in a certain way. I know for myself, coming from a background of mental illness in my youth, there are still parts about why. So I had a mental, sorry, I'll clarify. I feel like I'm not being transparent. I had a eating disorder in my youth.
Okay.
And there's a component of that diagnosis that, there's definitely trauma, and there's definitely, life experiences, but there's a component of it that's a little bit personality, and just, I think a little bit how your brain operates in the world. And so there are still, even though I'm very healthy and healed today, there are still components of it that I struggle with today, i.e., being very sort of single track driven, very hyper focused in some ways. And that can get me in trouble still, and so I've had to learn other resources or skills to help me deal with the fact that I'll still do that. I'll still hyper focus and not see the bigger picture sometimes. And I've had to learn ways to cope with that.
So let me ask you this. Again, there's so much more to 17 runs than we are able to talk about today. But just in terms of looking at idiosyncrasies and self-talk, where would you suggest our listeners start? What's the first thing for someone to really begin to think about for themselves, from your perspective?
I mean, that's such a great question. I think the truth is that we're all dealing with something in our lives at any one given time. Part of why getting comfortable with discomfort is so important is because there is always a level of friction. And, most of the time we're going about our lives and we're maybe dissociating or avoiding or in denial about it, or we're just living. We're just going through the motions of the day. But there are check-in moments where something happens, where you're confronted with how your life is maybe not going in the direction that you want it to. And in those moments, when this happens, the importance of pausing and trying to be really, really honest with yourself about what you really think is going on, I think is the most important part. To have the courage to look at it and say, you're going to feel it. It's really uncomfortable. This thing that's happening is really uncomfortable. And I think naturally the way that we're wired is to take action and fix it or avoid it in some way, dissociate it, like watch TV or go out with a friend or do something to not have to feel it.
Absolutely. Let me, speaking of pause, I'm going to have to pause here because we are just about out of time.
Oh, no
But
way.
there are so many important lessons to be learned by 17 runs. How does somebody get a copy of 17 runs or get in touch with you? Can you really, really quickly let us know that?
Yeah. So the book is sold wherever fine books are sold. I do love saying that. There is an audible version available where audiobooks are typically sold. It should be quite easy to find the book. You can also find us on Instagram at Life Lessons on the Run. And if people are experiencing a health challenge and they want to reach out to me personally, you can find me at movement-medicine.com.
And the full title of the book is
17 Runs, The Unbeaten Path to Unlock Life's True Potential.
Olivia Chadwick, I have to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a delight, and time has just flown by, which says to me that what you have to say has been really important, and I know that our listeners have really gained from your perspective. So thank you again for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I agree. Time went so quickly. It was beautiful. Thank you for giving it to me.
All right. You take care.
You too.
Well, folks, I'm Pamela Brewer, and this brings us to a close of this edition of M.E.S.H. I really want to thank you for joining me today here at M.E.S.H, where your mental, emotional, and social health is always on the agenda. I hope today's conversation has been helpful. And if it has, I'm going to ask you to hit that subscribe button and share this conversation with someone you care about. I'll be back next week with another conversation about all the pieces of our lives that shape our mental, emotional, and social health. And one more thing I want to remind you of. Not your job to read someone else's mind. I don't care if you've been together for 100 years. Not your job to read someone else's mind. It's not their job to read yours. Don't assume. Ask questions. You take care. See you next week.